When Officers Stephen and Joshua get tasked to investigate a light coming from the abandoned hospital, they are understandably hesitant, and in hindsight, maybe they should have rejected the job altogether, because what they encountered inside would shock both of them so much they retired from active duty the very next day. Nobody should ever go into that hospital again. Stephen's hands were shocking so much he nearly dropped his flashlight. He was alone as he had lost track of Joshua a while ago. They should have never split up. How could they have been so stupid? But now it was up to Stephen to solve this mystery. He was standing in front of the hospital room from which the light had come. Stephen had considered just turning back and leaving many times by now, but he could not leave Joshua behind. And he was also just too curious as to what the hell was going on in this place. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. It was supposed to be just a regular evening early night of patrolling around the city for Stephen and Joshua. The same route they did multiple times a week. It was a so-called sleeper route as nothing ever happened here. A lot of the route led through industry terrain and old parts of the city where less and less people were living as the years passed. The most notable building on the route was an old hospital that had been abandoned for at least 6 years after going bankrupt. Stephen and Joshua had already driven past it twice that evening as they were nearing the end of their shift. They were barely paying any attention anymore, but then Stephen managed to spot something out of the corner of his eye and he immediately ordered Joshua to stop the car. From one of the windows of the supposedly abandoned hospital seemed to be coming a strange light. It was somewhat faint, but now that the night has started to fall, it was unmistakable. Neither of the officers had seen this before, so they called the station to report it. They were told that nothing or nobody was supposed to be in the hospital and that they had to go and check it out. But just the two of them, as they had no backup available right now. Part of Stephen already felt regret for reporting this. The hospital was enormous and neither of them had any idea of how to navigate it. Plus, by the time they made their way inside, it would probably be pitch black. But they had gotten the assignment now, so they had no choice. Joshua parked the car and then the pair started scaling the fence. They had no key to open it up, so this was the only way. The climb was a lot more difficult than they expected. This place was locked up well, and so were all the hospital entrances. The only way that Stephen and Joshua could think of was to use the emergency staircase and then climb through the broken windows. The pair wondered that if anybody was actually in here, what entrance they could have possibly taken. They first wanted to stick together on their search, but quickly found out that this would probably be the whole night, and Joshua was not willing to do this. So against Stephen's better judgment, they split up so that they could cover more ground. They would stay in contact through their walkie-talkies, and this went well for the first hour. They managed to clear the first couple wings of the hospital and didn't find any sign of anybody having been here in years. When Stephen tried to reach Joshua for an update, all he could hear was static. Until after a little bit, this also suddenly stopped. Immediately after this moment, something happened that made Stephen's hair stand up on the back of his neck. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the empty halls of the hospital. There was no doubt in Stephen's mind that it came from Joshua. He started calling out for Joshua, but got no response, only dead silence. Stephen quickly retreated back into a room and closed the door. He made a call back to the station to tell them what had happened. They would send reinforcements to him as quickly as possible, but as the hospital was relatively far from the station, it would take at least half an hour before they would arrive. That was way too long for Stephen. Who knows what could happen to his partner in that half hour? He could not just hide out here and wait. Every second wasted was a second too much in his mind. So Stephen took a deep breath and made his way into the hallway again. He roughly had an idea where Joshua had to have been when the contact was broken and he heard the scream. With his weapon locked and loaded, he made his way to the staircase and went up a couple flights to get to the level Joshua was supposed to be at. On his way, he saw a lot of boot prints on the open door. This had to have been Joshua's doing. He was always fairly heavy-handed when doing these kinds of operations. Stephen was on the right track and it wasn't long before he found something. When he came to the reception area of the wing, he could immediately see that there had been a struggle here. And fairly recent, as lots of thighs were knocked over, revealing dustless spots of the desk or the ground. And then he found the final proof. On the ground was Joshua's walkie-talkie smashed to pieces. Joshua was in danger, but there was also something that gave Stephen a bit of hope for things to end up all right. He had quickly checked around the area of the supposed struggle and had not found Joshua anywhere. That meant that whoever or whatever he had encountered had either taken him or Joshua himself was chasing his assailant. But now Joshua was somewhat stuck as he had no idea what direction Joshua had gone or was taken. He vaguely remembered where the light had come from that made them initially. Besides, the reception was actually a layout of the hospital. Stephen quickly went over it and found that the light had most likely come from somewhere in the intensive care department. It was not too far away from where he was now, and he had no idea where else to look. As Stephen was making his way over to the intensive care, he noticed that there were no obvious signs of struggle or of somebody being dragged through the hallways. The hospital was difficult to navigate, but eventually Stephen had gotten close to the intensive. This was first only made clear to him by the signs that were still left hanging in the hospital, but when he entered the department, something else also immediately stood out to him. It was clear that there had been people here. And by the looks of things, it seemed like they had been here relatively long already. Seats in the hallways were arranged in circles. There was no broken glass or machine parts scattered on the floor, and there was something else. All the walls were filled with words in a language that Stephen did not understand and strange drawings and markings, all done in a very familiar color. To his relief, all the markings were old and dried up. But that didn't distract from the fact that this place looked like one of the staged and most early crime scenes Stephen had ever seen. He started calling out to see if anybody was around. After trying a couple times, it became clear that he was not going to get a response. If there was somebody here, they were not very eager to make their presence known to him. Stephen was disappointed, as he really just hoped that he would hear Joshua's voice again. He had to check the rest of the department out. There had to be something he could find here that could help him. He started going room by room, but all of them seemed to be abandoned and dark. But Stephen did manage to determine that there had probably been people sleeping here not that long ago. While the whole department was as strange as could be, nothing had stood out to Stephen as being useful. He still had no idea what these people had been doing here and why they were not here now. He did not even know where the strange light had come from. When Joshua stepped out of one of the dark rooms again, he suddenly saw it from out of the corner of his eye. The door at the end of the hallway. Out from underneath it there was a faint light source. Stephen slowly and silently started approaching the door. He tried to listen if he could hear any voices coming from that direction, but it just stayed completely quiet. He needed to get that door open if he wanted to find the answers he had been looking for. When he felt the handle, it turned out to be locked. But this was not going to stop Stephen, not even a little bit. He took a step back, announced his presence, and proceeded to bust the door open, full force kick just below the door handle. He was greeted by a bright flickering light. It took him a little bit to adjust to it, but then he quickly realized what he was seeing. For a second, it shocked him so much that he actually jumped back a little bit. The room was full of lit candles dripping all over the floor. The walls were full of those red words and markings again, but this time there was also a large one on the floor. There was a large red pentagram painted on the floor. It all started to make sense now. The markings on the walls, the circles, even the fact that all of this was happening in a hospital. The people that had been living here were some sort of devil worshippers. Stephen could not even bear the thought of what they could have possibly done to Joshua. If he was to believe the stories, these people were supposed to be completely crazy. And then he remembered that he had actually heard a lot of stories recently that could be about these people. In the city, it had become a much more regular occurrence to find pentagrams drawn on things and even some sacrifices. There had been some speculation that some sort of devil-worshipping cult had found its way into town. As Stephen was pondering all this over, he suddenly heard a loud thud out the corner of the room. It seemed to be coming out of the large lockers that were placed there. These also had a lock on them, but we already know that Stephen doesn't get stopped by locked doors. Stephen was very careful, as it was not out of the realm of possibilities that there was somebody in there ready to ambush him. But that was a risk Stephen was willing to take. With one clean hit from his baton, Stephen manages to smash the lock to pieces and opens up the locker. A smile comes to Stephen's face as he locks eyes with a scared but relieved-looking Joshua. He is tied up and gagged, so no wonder he had not been able to respond up till now. When Joshua cuts him loose, he starts to explain what happened to him. He had been ambushed by 4 of the apparent cult members at the reception. He had tried to fight them off for a bit, but when he realized it was not going to end in his favor, he decided to cooperate with them, and so they tied him up and brought him here. He has no idea what they were planning on doing with him, but he would hazard a few guesses. Luckily, nothing happened, but they had to get back to the police station as quickly as possible to report it. Stephen was making a few quick pictures of the scene as evidence when he suddenly heard a low humming from the hallway and movement. People were approaching. They had to get out of here now. They rushed to the end of the hallway, and then they heard a scream behind them. They looked back, and at the other end of the hallway saw a group of people dressed in red robes and holding candles. They were most likely on their way to Stephen. Both Stephen and Joshua and the group of devil worshippers stood still for a second, and then all hell broke loose. The red-dressed cult members started chasing behind Stephen and Joshua, who were running for their lives. All they could think was to go down a couple floors and find maybe a window to get out of. They eventually found the stairs Stephen had used before to get up, and at the bottom was an exit door. Third time's the charm, as this door was actually open and they managed to escape. With all the adrenaline, they almost managed to jump the surrounding fence and got to their car. There were legions of police officers there within 15 minutes, as they instantly responded when Joshua called in what happened. They were well in time to arrest all the cult members present before they got a chance to make a break for it. This situation is still developing, but what we do know is that this whole ordeal had quite the effect on the two officers involved, Stephen and Joshua. They both decided to retire from active duty the very next day as they never wanted to experience something like this again. The abandoned hospital is now being guarded a lot more actively to avoid any more people sneaking in and making it their home or hideout. All reminiscent of these devil worshippers have been scrubbed out of the intensive care unit and peace has finally returned to the city again. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming stories.